Delighted that we're joined today by Diane Lightfoot from Business Disability Forum. Diane, it seems like ages since I saw you, well, maybe yesterday, because we were at the ILO at their Global Business Disability Network conference, where we were talking about taking accessibility, disability inclusion in business from the margins to the mainstream. So it's great to have you and to be able to follow up on that conversation today. And thank you for putting up with me for yet another day. I mean, it's a pretty long week for you, I have to say.
Well, I think it's probably the other way round. Thank you for still having me on after me probably boring you silly at various points or something silly anyway at the ILO. And yet it does seem like only yesterday, possibly because it is.
Yeah. So I mean, it was great to see so many businesses gathering there and sending people to share what they're doing and their best practices and so on. And we've both been going, and Deborah, I know you've also been from time to time. You couldn't be there this year because you were eating turkey, because we're recording this over Thanksgiving week. But when we started, it was definitely just the disability people and to a certain extent the HR people, because it was the DEI, diversity disability people, rather than the accessibility people that were generally attending the conference. And I think that over time that's changed. What I've noticed over the last couple of years is there's actually sort of several different groups of people now attending. You've got some technical people attending. You still got the DEI HR people attending. It is the International Labour Organization after all. But then there's also the CSR and sustainability people taking part now, and this created a really interesting dynamic. And we were talking about this off air, and maybe Deborah, you want to come in on this, where there's different viewpoints as to why you would be doing disability inclusion, right? So there's the viewpoint of, we do this because it's the right thing to do. It makes us better organizations. It makes us more attractive. It's part of our employee value proposition. Or we do it because it's compliance. And then there's the sort of, well, we do it because it's kind of compliance, but we have to report on it. And so there's the lenses through which we were looking at it were really quite different throughout the day. And maybe, like, Diane, because you were there, you might say something, and then Deborah, you can comment.
Sure. And I think that whole thing around the business case versus the kind of ethical moral case, if you like, it keeps coming up all the time. And yesterday morning, I think it was yesterday morning, it feels like it could have been a year ago or about half an hour ago, Rubina Singh from the ILO was talking about their new report, which is called Putting the I in ESG. And she was talking about double materiality and talking about social stuff. So obviously in this context, disability inclusion in both a qualitative and a quantitative way. But then she said, but the message is not hire disabled people because it will make you more money. That is not the message. The message is it's the right thing to do. And I'm paraphrasing here, Neil, you can correct me. And then if investors will start looking for that because they believe it's an important part about being a responsible, sustainable corporation, not because they're just seeing pound signs on people's heads. And that was really interesting for me because I was reading a report a little while ago before one of our other events that we had from an organisation called Catalyst, who had surveyed, I think, 6,500 people with disabilities. And they were saying that the kind of business case around productivity, if used on its own, could lead to an increase in microaggressions and tokenism and all this kind of stuff. And so they were saying, if you're going to use the business case, you have to use the ethical moral case as well. Otherwise, it drives the wrong behaviours. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yes. And Diane, I know that we were talking before we got on air, and we definitely need to let you reintroduce yourself just in case our audience, I mean, we just know you so well and you've been on the show multiple times, but I'm going to make a quick comment and then give it back to you so you can reintroduce yourself and your amazing organization. Because Neil had said in the comment, I forgot to let her introduce herself. Yes. So, but I would just say, make this comment and then turn it back to you and Neil can comment, I think you're right. I think that the times have changed so much and the expectations that the community, which by the way, who is even the community? The community is so splintered and it's and this cancer culture and all the things that are happening right now, it is making it very tricky. And I think it is very tricky for corporate brands. I think it's also very, very tricky for organizations like yours, Diane, which I would consider a business to business group. And so I think that, and I know the tones are getting aggressive some ways. I would say even the comment, Diane, you had made about the wonderful speech that was done at the ILO. Sadly, here in the United States, and I want to mention again, I love being an American, but sadly here in the United States, we were really hopeful that when the funders, the private equity firms, the angel investors came in and said, wow, let's stop talking about the business case, or the business case is ethical and everything. Let's make sure we're meaningfully including these people. Unfortunately, we did not have, sadly, here in the United States, we certainly in the accessibility field did not have the kind of success we were hoping for. What we saw instead was private investors jumping into this, spending tons of money, reducing it down to as unhelpful to us as possible, creating all these overlays, using these index tools and different things against the community. It's just sort of sad how some of it has unfolded. And so I think there's good reasons why we're having these difficult, tough conversations. But sometimes, Diane, it feels to me like we keep making the same mistakes over and over again. But let me turn it over to you and I'll hush.
So if you want me to introduce myself, now that I haven't, I could say that I am an international woman of mystery. Unfortunately, that is not the case, but I am lucky enough to be CEO of Business Disability Forum, which is based in the UK and now works with over 600 businesses across all the sectors. At least half of them are global. But we describe ourselves, you're right that we are a business-to-business organisation and we're a non-profit, but we describe ourselves as sitting kind of at the intersection of business, government, and disabled people. And that's really important, that all our positions and all our advice is informed by disabled people, informed by the community. And it's somewhere between 60 and 65% of our team identify as having a disability or long-term condition. And that's something that's really, really important to us about what we do. It's not kind of, this is what we're going to sort of say that we've kind of cooked up. This is actually what we've learned from the community, from within our own and also kind of out there. And I liked what you were saying about angel investors. That's such a great term, isn't it? I suspect they probably aren't as angelic as the term suggests. But just yesterday, again, in this same panel, two different panelists had different views on, one said they were in favour of targets and not quotas. But then the other one said they were in favour of quotas as a means for drawing down investment. So not quite the same as you get a fine if you don't meet it, but you get money if you do meet it. And of course, that is, well, from my perspective, and I'm sure yours, Deborah, that is fraught with, let's at least say, unintended consequences, potentially, which does worry me.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Yes, I must have been lacking in attention at that moment. I would have been raising an eyebrow when people were saying, we think that quotas are a good thing.
Well, it was only one person, and it was towards the end of the panel. And I think it was also because I'd sat near the front on the second day and I discovered the little earpiece thing, which meant you could hear a lot. Clearly. But I did kind of go, oh, but then the panel wound up. So, yeah.
So it's interesting. I think that you can reward people for hitting targets, but when you make them mandatory, that becomes really challenging, and it does, as you say, drive these unintended behaviors, because you end up with things like phantom hiring, or sheltered workshops, where yes, you get numbers of people that are ostensibly employed, but the quality of those jobs is usually at the lower end, and people don't get the career progression and everything else. And so, are you wanting to come in, or are you doing deaf clapping there, Deborah, on the
No,
screen?
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay. So I think that, whilst the intent is good, we've observed over many decades that the outcomes can go awry, and I think that, when I talk about sheltered workshops, there are disability-friendly companies in places like France that are starting to change the model from the sheltered workshop to something that's a bit better. Because when I first started working for my current company, was somewhat surprised at the way that things operated in France. It's like, oh no, it's okay. We outsource our disabled people. Because we don't employ them ourselves, we outsource them. Working for an outsourcer, that was even stranger for me. But what I'm seeing among some of the better ones now is that they actually have a model where they want high employee churn. So that what they're doing is they're training people up, they're giving them real jobs, and they're getting them to a point where they want them to leave to go into the employment in the mainstream companies. And I think that model probably does work. It's the ones where you have people doing the low end jobs they're just parked there for the rest of their lives, where there's no prospect of being able to progress, that I get really concerned about.
Totally agree with you. And I think also the expectations. So when somebody goes to a sheltered workshop or a trainee scheme or whatever it is, and I say this having worked for a learning disability charity for 13 years before I came to BDF, just being really clear at the beginning that this is not where we expect you to stay forever. It's going to be somewhere that is hopefully a stepping stone and a springboard and all those kinds of things. And sometimes, to be fair to some of the projects that I've seen, people don't want to move on because it's cozy and it's comfortable, and they came into it without an expectation of it moving on, and they know all the staff and they've got all their friends and it's lovely. So I think you have to be really clear from the beginning to say, this is about training you to get mainstream employment with a mainstream employer. This isn't somewhere where you're being parked, whether you actually end up saying, well, I quite like being parked here, thanks very much. And that's quite a difficult mindset and conversation for a lot of the people that run these projects, I think.
Well, all this, I would like to bring two issues to the conversation. One is the Boston Consulting research that told us that organizations have a certain number of people with disabilities, but then they have a lot more than they think they have. Some numbers believing, we have 5%. In the end, they have 25%, because many people don't identify themselves. So how can we, all right, we have quotas, but there's always a number of people that are not going to be included or considered because they don't identify themselves. And the other angle is, okay, we have quotas, we hire people with disabilities for certain jobs. How would that affect the perception that we have about what a person with disability can do? Because you see them doing, is someone that is taking care of the copies at the printer, or so. I just want to bring this because I think sometimes when we go into the conversations of the quotas, we might miss the bigger picture. I don't know what you think of this.
I think you're right. And I mean, it's it's an incredibly live discussion at the moment in the policy space, because it's very likely that pay gap reporting will be introduced in the UK, or at least consulted on. And in terms of workforce, we already see that the most inclusive organisations can have the lowest number of people sharing that they have a disability or condition, because they don't need to, because the infrastructure is there, the choice is there, the flexibility is there, you can self-serve adjustments, whatever it is. So there's that angle on it. And then when it gets to the pay gap piece specifically, you see all these issues of people being refused to work part-time or something like that because it messes up the pay gap. And as you say, if people don't tell you in the first place that they have a condition, then you end up with very, very narrow ideas of what disability is or what disabled people can do, let alone all the monitoring and reporting. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's going to be a real challenge, because I mean, we in principle support the process of closing the disability pay gap. We're committed to doing it, but you're working with very fragmented and very poor data, and to really address, you're only addressing it for the ones that have made a declaration officially, and so you then have a huge communication exercise and a huge trust exercise to go through with the rest of your employee base to say, we want this because we want to do right by you, and that's going to take some serious effort and some serious convincing from employers to get through to employees that the rationale behind this is to pay them more, because that's not usually what employees are expecting their employers to be wanting to do.
No. So, something that I follow very closely is about the way how large companies communicate. And to be fair, it's very rarely we see a CEO ever mention the word disability. It's very rare. And I think that the fact that is a very rare, or that sometimes they only talk about this at very specific events, is not actually helping organizations in the overall, and people in the organizations to feel the confidence. Yes, I can talk about it because my CEO is talking about it. I think this is that sometimes the people who lead these conversations at organizations are not at the senior level, that people feel enough confidence to talk about themselves.
I would like to come in here and Diane, I know you have the answer right away, but good point that you were making, Antonio, because you know what we've seen. So this is my question for everybody on the call. I just am wondering if society is expecting too much from our corporate employers and for our business to business groups as well, because the reality is we are asking employers to solve these major social issues that we don't know how to solve as society. So what we've done is we said, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break you into all these little tiny pieces so that I understand who you are, Deborah. So you identify as a woman. You're a woman over a certain age. You're an American. You're blah, 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 right? We keep going down. Obviously, you are neurodiverse with ADHD. But it feels like, because I hear what you were saying, Antonio, but it still feels like, and the points that both Neil and Diane made, in that once we know you've identified, we know better how to support you because you've identified. But most of us don't want to identify because maybe society or my boss is going to decide that I'm broken somehow and I'm not going to be able to add value. And I think, Antonio, even now, if the CEO of and I've worked for major multi-billion-dollar companies, if the CEO of my company comes out and says they have a disability, I'm probably going to really appreciate that because of the work and because of who I am. But I don't know that that would make me as an employee more willing to come out and admit something that might be seen as a detriment. So I just wonder if we are expecting the wrong things by the leaders that are trying to make a difference for our community. And I know I'm a broken record with this, but I just believe if the community does not come together and convene and become discoverable and have our voices heard in a different way, we're going to continue to fail, all of us. I also want to say, I know there are business groups out there that don't employ people with disabilities. I'm not going to name names, but I do know who you guys are. I do know that you are out there doing a lot of talking, and yet you have one person maybe with neurodiversity working for you. So you're not even including us. So when we hear things like Diane's group has 65% of our community working for them with lived experiences, we need the allies too. We need our allies. But I just am so worried about it. And Neil used the word fragmented and poor data. I'm just saying, first of all, I want to applaud Diane, all the work that y'all have done to make a difference for so many years. The ILO, so many groups trying to make a difference. Corporate representatives like Antonio and Neil. But I still say, until we come together with pride and we come together in ways that we have not, I also am starting to get a little skeptical and thinking there's a lot of money being spent, and yet money doesn't want to flow to these identity conversations. Do the money people not want us to convene? Because if we convene, everything would change in I think in a very powerful way. So Diane, over to you.
Gosh, I don't know about having the answer, but just some things. And I think you're so right about coming together. And it was our global conference, our BDF global conference, just over a week yesterday. And the closing keynote was from Lamondre Pugh of Billion Strong, who is always an incredible speaker. But one thing he said that I think lots of people took away was, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the need for the community to be together, to be present, to be heard, to take up space. It was very, very well said and very, very powerful. And the fragmentation piece is something that worries me. There was a question at the ILO conference. There was a really good panel on ERGs, on employee resource groups. And one of the questions was, should you separate out neurodiversity and my brackets, other disability in employee resource groups? And the people on the panel all said, well, it depends. It depends where you are and what's right for you and those sorts of things. And businesses do different things. And I'm not going to pronounce one way or the other. But my question when I was listening to that was, why? Why do you want separation? What is the problem with coming together? And if we ultimately want to get to a place where we're all just seen as valid, valuable, important human beings who are all different, then fragmenting further, in my opinion, is not helpful. And it's not helpful to say, well, we don't want to be with you with your dodgy legs or your dodgy ears or your dodgy eyes, because we're this. And I just don't think that's helpful. And I was also wrote down, consider the shared protection of the law. Also, people may have more than one condition. And ultimately, if you experience barriers, then there is more that you have in common than you don't. So I do really worry about that. And then, thank you. I'm sure that will be controversial on the chat. And the thing about expecting too much for employers, I'm not sure this is exactly the same thing, but I've been thinking a lot about, like, the UK government wanting employers to do more around, say, health prevention and healthcare and those sorts of things. And again, I've been sort of reflecting in how much should we say this is what we expect from you, employers, and how much should we say no, this is the responsibility of the state. But then if the state doesn't have enough funding or isn't doing it, then employers do need to step in. But then you get this divide between the bigger employers that not all, but that can see the benefit and afford it, and then maybe the smaller employers who, even if they do see the benefit, can't. And you risk ending up with sort of a two-tier or multiple-tier system, really. So I think these philosophical arguments are things that we're all really quite wrestling with at the moment. I'm not sure that answered your question, Deborah.
It was wonderful. It was excellent.
Do you want to comment, Deborah?
No. No, you go ahead, Antonio.
No, I just want to briefly mention the fact that not just at the employer level, resource groups, but also if you look at how people with disabilities are represented in different European countries, of how organizations are fragmented. Every time that there is fragmentation, the community loses power and loses influence. And in some countries, if I go to south of Europe, sometimes the overall, if we consider people with disabilities as a community, we see that they don't have the strength and the lobby, the power, because they don't work together. Everyone is working differently, so they are not able to come together to to be able to be at the table, to be able to buy a ticket to be at the table, because they all work on their own things. They don't even talk with each other. So I think that's something, that's an observation that I see that in some situations have putting people with disabilities behind because there's not enough cooperation.
Yeah. Yeah, we've observed for years the fact that everybody wants to fight for their piece of the pie rather than fighting to make the pie bigger. I think one of the other things that we were thinking about over the last few days was, and I had discussions with a number of people, was that when we talk about high performing teams in a different context, so we were talking in terms of employment, and we were talking about, people with disabilities are really great workers and but we also have to acknowledge that we get sick, that we have to put in extra effort, that all of these things impact on our health. Because and Diane, you were talking about the employer's responsibility for health. Sports teams have substitutes, they have a bench, and yet when you look to large companies, the bench is usually the area that no one wants to be on, right? Now to a certain extent, no one wants to be on the bench. If you're a professional footballer, you want to be substituted onto the field to score your goals or whatever, but for the good of the team, you need that ability to move people in and out when they get tired and so on. And we don't really do that in the same way in business. We're always looking at sort of productivity and efficiency and people booking their hours and so on, rather than the outcomes. And I think that I don't have the answer as to how you address this, because actually you need some of that slack time. And it's not just, have you booked your annual leave? I think there's more to it than that in terms of re-examining how we might design work. I think we're going to have to re-examine how we work anyway, because of the changes in technology that are coming, that are going to change the way that we work. So maybe it's an opportunity that we can reimagine how we work collectively together, so we can substitute in and substitute out, so that people don't get so sick, people don't burn out. Because you look all around, everyone I was talking to, they were happy to be together, they were happy to convene, they were really happy to see each other. Everyone was tired.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And everyone was really feeling it. So I wonder whether there's something there. And then the last thing was we were talking about it before we came on air, and that was whether or not, and we've talked about it on Access Ted a lot of times, we need to be going out and talking to other industries and getting out of our bubble. But Diane, you said it. There's also something about being with like-minded people as well.
Yeah, there's something about replenishing your energy and getting that kind of affirmation that you are pulling in the same direction, that you are making a difference, even if that's chipping away at it rather than kind of a huge seismic change overnight. So yes, we need to reach beyond the converted, but coming together as our community also has a huge value, I think.
Yeah. And just keeping with that sporting analogy, I mean, that was my last ILO event as representing my organisation as chair. So I was passing on the baton to one of our other former Access Chat guests, Steve Fremmel from Merck MSD. So I think that it is good for us all to get together. And so thank you, Diane. It's been a marvellous chat and great to have you back with us. And I'm sure we'll enjoy the conversation on social media as well. I need to thank my clear text for keeping us captioned and Amazon for helping support us to stay on air into our 11th year now. So thank you once again.
Thanks for having me.
I have no idea why I took a second fucking pill. I was just like fiddling around.